Hi, this is Curt, and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Roundup.
Okay, why don't you pick up the FLSA? This is a common issue. This shouldn't shock anybody, but it always seems to.
Well, it continues to be a problem, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. But we've got a firefighter. It's actually the union president in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's president of IAFF Local 319. And he's filed a class action lawsuit claiming that the city, when they calculate overtime pay, have not included has not included longevity pay in the rate or the calculation for the overtime rate. And the wording of the FLSA is a little bit complicated. They use this term regular rate.
Only you would say it's a little bit complicated, by the way.
Well, it's a little bit. I think the Supreme Court has referred to it as perplexing, but it's a little bit complicated. But essentially, what regular rate means is it's not just your hourly rate, what you think of as your hourly rate. When you're paying someone overtime, you have to include, and here we go, you have to include everything that would constitute remuneration. Now, when Bill Macaron and I were first putting the FLSA program together 10 years ago, we said, no, that's a typo, remuneration. That's not a word. We thought it was remuneration. It's not. Right. Remuneration is a word, but essentially what it means is anything that you receive as cash is remuneration. Okay, so longevity pay, what do you call it? Acting on
guaranteed stipends.
Yep, educational incentives.
If you're an EMT, you get a bump. That type of thing.
Any of those things have to. Now, there's some things that there's about six. There's actually 8 exceptions, but we kind of think about it as 6 primary exceptions. And they're very, very narrow. So you have to kind of fit into those narrow exceptions. But essentially, if your employer pays you something, other than like expenses, and there's certain exceptions for bonuses and stuff, but certainly something like longevity pay, it's not even close. It has to be included. So do you have to include it in their regular hourly pay? No. Okay, you're gonna pay them $25 an hour and $5,000 a year longevity pay. That's fine. Okay, the minute they work overtime, you have to figure out what is the hourly component of that $5,000 longevity pay, and then whenever they work overtime, you have to figure out like how many cents an hour. Is it 17 cents an hour, 28 cents an hour, $1 an hour, whatever it is? You've got to figure it out and put it in there. And that's where it gets complicated. Because, does he work 40 hours a week times 52 weeks? So now we've got to divide it by 2,080. We've got to divide the 5,000 by 2,080. Right. Does he work 53 hours a week, 56 hours a week? What hours can we count? What can't we count? And now it's off to the races for the legals that practice in this area, which is very.
And this is big money. People understand, like, it's just a few cents. Nobody's going to care. Wait a minute. When you take that few cents, multiply it by 2 years or 3 years, if it was willful, right? And then you multiply it by a big city where there's hundreds of firefighters. This is a big deal. And lawyers who get a good amount of money from this, like these cases. So if you think it's just 20 cents, listen. Err on the side of paying more. It's not worth the FLSA.
It's not. And, we've got cases where the total payout is like $5,000 or $6,000. The attorney's fees are $200,000.
And you're paying them as the losing employer.
And part of it is the attorneys sometimes, not all attorneys, but sometimes the law firms that will come in, because most cities don't have in-house counsel, the city solicitor, that can handle an FLSA case. So they got to go hire a big firm to come in. And these guys are going to grind and grind and grind. And they're going to make it hard. Well, in the meantime, the city is paying big bucks for them. So you have the firefighter gets $6,000, big deal. The attorney for the firefighter gets $200,000. And meanwhile, the city is sitting on a $400,000 legal bill for the city's attorney. So for $6,000.
And it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there, because the discovery of I want every timesheet back for 3 years, every single timesheet, every sign-in sheet, every overtime, every CBA and agreement, every bump,
You sound like you've been
bonus.
through it. It's like a rectal exam. I know.
Yeah,
I know.
it is exactly like that. But that is incredible amounts of information that has to be produced, and that's not free, right? You're not hitting a print button necessarily, and especially in smaller communities where for every timesheet, time card, whatever. So let's just go back in case people are confused because we're at the end of this, but let's go back. Your point is, let me take the low-hanging fruit. If you are guaranteed, let's say at the end of the year, right? So that's where people think, oh, I don't have to worry about this now. At the end of the year, you're guaranteed if you're a EMT or a paramedic, you get $1,000 extra dollars. It's guaranteed. Now, some will argue, I have unsuccessfly, some will argue, well, it's not guaranteed because I may lose my EMT, right?
It doesn't matter if it's guaranteed or not.
Yeah, well, at the state level, actually, for computation of overtime and failure to pay overtime, it actually does matter. But the guarantee is a very loose standard, and I can only speak to New York State. But
I think what the difference I think is private industry versus government. Okay,
yes,
like I have a paralegal, Malcolm. I mean, you have office employees as well. Okay, Christmas I give Malcolm a bonus. Okay, that bonus, because we're private industry, I'm not under contract. I'm not even sure what I'm going to give them this year, but I'll give them a bonus. Okay,
right.
That is a discretionary bonus that does not have to be included. Okay, but when you agree to give someone longevity pay,
right, okay, which is contractual,
or even if you make it contingent upon them meeting certain requirements, okay, but if it's in the collective bargaining agreement, it's in municipal personnel manual, personnel regulations, and so on and so forth, it has to be incled.
Right, you factor that into your time and a half calculation,
and that's one of the challenges with folks that are familiar with the FLSA in the private sector, where bonuses are allowed. In the public sector, you can't give away taxpayer money because Brad did a great job of that fire, I'm going to give him an extra $500. You can't do that.
It's called the anti-gift prohibition, right?
Yeah.
It's municipalities in most constitutions. There's a line that says no public fund shall be spent for the private benefit or as a gift or whatever. So it's called the anti-gift prohibition, and that's what it is. You can't just bonus money, but you can give performance incentives that are guaranteed. And as you say, it doesn't matter, but they're guaranteed for the most part anyway. If you're an EMT, if this, if that, right? Lieutenants get a bump, longevity pay, you got to factor that in. And I will bet you a lot of, because I ask it, it's when I take over a client, they have employees, it's one of my first questions is I want to see their pay structure, right? And let me see how you're doing overtime, because I don't want to be the lawyer on the end of, oh, I didn't catch it, right? I'll lose a client. But yeah, please, if you're a union, look at this. If you're an employer, look at this. On both ends, it doesn't matter. Make sure you're including anything in the CBA, any payments that you're going to give them, which are mostly guaranteed payments, right? Not discretionary. But either way, if you give payments, additional payments, include them in the calculations, or it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and I saw a news article about this lawsuit, and the city was quoted as complaining that the union never brought it to our attention.
Not their obligation.
Well, there's a more important reason. When, like right now, if somebody comes to me right now and wants to file an FLSA suit, we're gonna file it Monday morning probably, okay? Because if you let it go like 3 or 4 months, then you lose the ability to go back and recover that money. Whereas if we file it now, then basically, what's tomorrow? Tomorrow's the 21st. Then basically we're going to be able to go back 3 years or 2 years or 3 years from November 21st. If I wait until February 1st, we're going to go back 2 years or 3 years from February 1st. So we're going to lose money. And, is it going to make a difference on the front end? Maybe, maybe not. It's going to be up to when the city figures out, oh boy, they were right. And now we got to start calculating this properly.
Right. So. And I will say, I do HR manuals for a living. I do them constantly, HR manuals. And it matters whether you're private or government. I have two separate types of manuals. But I put into every one, I'm going to unveil the secret here, but I put into every one Yeah, it's the employee's obligation to notify us of time card errors. You have a week to do it, and then we will investigate and pay.
Yeah.
But for FLSA, that's not going to carry a hill of beans for the most part. May help on willful, right?
Yep.
It may help on the willful thing. So it'll cut
Mhm.
out a year of damages from, now you can only go back 2 years, not 3 years. I've never seen a case on that, but that's my intent when I add it, right? But
Interesting, yeah.
but it's not going to stop. We're not going to be able to turn to the employee and say, well, you should have known the FLSA. You should have known how I calculate your overtime. This is on you, not me. It's not going to do that. I'll save you a year of damages, which will be huge potentially, but I don't think that line transfers the blame to the employee. What it's more supposed to be is, when I usually use that is, hey, I didn't tell you that I worked from home. I didn't tell you that I went to this class. I didn't tell you I did this stuff. And now a year later, I'm telling you I did it. Well, okay, that's on you, the employee, right? Maybe on the employer in rare circumstances, like I paid you to go to the training. I should have known. But for the most part, but I don't want any employer to think, oh, we're going to put this on the employee. That's a mostly losing argument.
Yeah, our friend Brian Massett, who teaches the FLSA, has a saying about the FLSA, and he says, if you think you're going to do something to make it easier for you, forget about it. Okay, the FLSA is not intended to make it easy for the employer. That's not within what the goal of the FLSA is. So if you think you're going to do something that's going to save you money or an easier way to do it, it's probably not going to work.
Right. And look, if any employer thinks, oh, this is unfair, these issues come out of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, when we were, penalizing the employees, when we were, making it, when we all know where the FLSA comes. Hey, by the way, I want to give you a 40-hour job, but you're going to give me 10 hours for free. I'm going to pay you for 30, and you will volunteer the other 10, right? And that's the kind of things that created the need for the FLSA. But you're right. So if you're an employer thinking this is unfair, you better, and I'm going to end on this, and I don't get paid to say this, but if you're a fire department and you have not attended Curt's class on FLSA, you are nuts. This is so complicated, so scary, so expensive to be wrong, and you will be wrong more likely through ignorance than intent, right? So maybe they only go back 2 years, but if you have the opportunity now to go to Curt's class, go to the class. You will save yourself this exact headache. How's that? And we should have not a paid advertisement.
No, I appreciate that plug. And our next one, we're going live. We're going in Georgetown, Texas in February. So we're excited about that. This is our first live delivery since COVID started. And so we're excited about that. I'm not sure we'll see, because a lot of people are kind of saying, well, we really like the online delivery, and so we may do one a year, but I don't know. We're going to see how it goes in February, and then make a decision if we're going to stay online maybe once and then continue to go live, or